Hi everyone. Well, the Shabbos Shirah, Shabbos Beshalach is known for its music. Did you also notice that perhaps it should be noted for its humor as well? Let me explain. I have a very good friend, Rosh Yeshiva of Daniel Feldman, who once challenged me to find the first reference to humor in the Torah. And stumped, after a while, I gave up, and I asked him what and where was it to be found. He told me that it was in Shabbos Beshalach. He reached for a chumash, and he showed me exactly where. For as the Jews were nearing the shores of the Yam Suf, they discovered that they were boxed in. The sea was raging in front of them, and the quick, ruthless Egyptian army was quickly gathering speed, catching up to them from behind. And they didn't know what they were supposed to do. And so they turned to Moshe Rabbeinu and they declared, Hamibaliyin kfarim b'Mitzrayim lekachtanu lamus b'midbar. Are there not enough graves in the land of Egypt that you took us out to the desert in order to die? I looked down at the pasuk, and then I looked at Rabbi Feldman, and I said to him, so what? What's the point? So he turned and moved his hand and said, look at the Ibn Ezra, who notes that the people were speaking b'derech tzachus, that they were speaking in a joke. In other words, says the Ibn Ezra, they were using humor. Clearly, there's a place for humor and joking in the Jewish tradition, and it's easily found at the shores of Yam Suf. But the humor doesn't seem to find its place into other episodes that we read about in the Parsha. For in the immediate aftermath of the splitting of the sea, and the singing of Az Yashir, the high point of our Parsha this week, the Jews find themselves in another challenging predicament. This time, 3 days after singing at the shores of Yam Suf, they find themselves in a place called Marah, and they discover they were not able to drink the waters of Marah, ki marim hain, because they were bitter. And while the simple antecedent for the word hain, for the pronoun, refers to the water, in other words, that the water was bitter, the Kotzker Rebbe notes that it was not the water, but rather the people that were bitter. And hence they complained to Moshe Rabbeinu, saying, now, what will we drink? Was this another joke? Didn't they forget about the events that had just happened 3 days before? Why the bitter challenge about the bitter water? And what about its betterment? And while we're at it, how does the betterment, the solution of throwing a tree into the water, somehow make a difference? What was God's symbolic message to the people? But if I may, let's look at just one more episode in the Parsha that may shed some light on these first issues. The complaints we read for the rest of the Parsha seem to continue from the people. First of all, the people need food, and so Hashem gives them man. Then they come to another place again, and they need water again, and they complain to Moshe Rabbeinu again. And Moshe brings them water. And so as a result, the people name the place. And they call the place this time Masa Umariva. Why do they call the Masa Umariva? Here again, the Torah records the people's irony. Because Al Rib B'nai Yisrael Valno Sosames Hashem Lemor Hayesh Hashem B'kirbeinu Im Ayin. They named the place based on the fact is that they pondered whether Hashem was with them or not. For this joke, this irony, and the questioning of Hashem this time, they were rewarded with a massive punishment, with a battle that rages until today. I refer, of course, to the immediate end of the Parsha, with the battle of Amalek. You see, Rashi notes the proximity of the naming of the place and the battle that ensued immediately thereafter as based on the fact that everything is connected. Rashi explains that the attack came about against the Jewish people because of their questioning. He compares it to a little boy who's riding atop his father's shoulders. When he wants something, he asks the father to please pick it up and give it to him. And of course, time and again, with the child perched on top, the father gives the child that which the child seeks. However, at one point, the child bumps into another person and he asks him, have you seen my father? Well, at that point, the father turns and explains to the child that if you do not know where I am, then I'll drop you, and then we'll see what happens. and the child is put on the ground and is immediately bitten by a dog. This, says Rashi, is exactly what happened over here. The people asked if Hashem was with them, and he left them open to an attack. But why was this not considered a good old joke? Just like the episode in Mara, just like the episode on the shores of Yam Suf when they asked about the graves. Why was this case of the cases met with battle and Amalek and tragedy, with the anger of Hashem, and not those other cases? It seems ironic in the light of the other challenges of the Parsha. And by the way, that's not too funny. Unless we choose to classify the differences in style of joke, noting the difference between those earlier questions and this last one, with the cynicism that was utilized in formulating the last episode. Let me explain with a story. There was once a college professor who challenged his class with the following question: did God make everything that is? And one student jumped up and said, absolutely. Everything, young man? Asked the professor. Yes, he did, sir, answered the student. The professor responded, okay, if God made everything, then God made evil. And if we can only create from within ourselves, doesn't that prove that God is evil? The professor responded, take a look. And the student didn't have a response. And that cynical professor was happy to have once again proven to his unsuspecting students that belief in God was a myth. And then another student quietly raised his hand from the back. May I ask you something, sir? He said to the professor. Yes, you may, responded the professor. The man stood up and said, sir, is there such a thing as cold? Of course there is, said the professor. What kind of question is that? Haven't you ever been cold? The young man replied, actually, sir, cold doesn't exist. What we consider to be cold is really only the absence of heat. Absolute zero exists when there's absolutely no heat. But cold does not really exist. We only created the term cold to describe how we feel when heat is not there. Then the student continued, sir, by the way, is there such a thing as dark? And once again the professor responded, of course there is. And once again the student replied, actually, sir, for the most part darkness does not exist. Darkness is really only the absence of light. Darkness is what we mean when we want to describe what happens when there is no light present. And finally the young man said, sir, is there such a thing as evil? And the professor responded, of course. We have terrible theft. We have murders. We have violence everywhere in our world. Those things must be classified as evil. The student responded, actually, sir, evil doesn't exist on its own. Evil is simply the explanation that we provide to explain the absence of the awareness of God. Evil is a term that man developed to classify the state where God is not present, like cold without heat or darkness without light. There is no evil where there is God. And dumbfounded, the cynical professor had nothing to say. To me, the students' debate points might help us understand the difference between the irony and the bitterness, which were redirected by Hashem in the first two instances in our Parsha, and the cynicism that led to the battle with Amalek. Yes, in all three instances, the people challenged Moshe Rabbeinu, complaining to him instead of complaining to Hashem. And yes, in all three instances, they verbally protested their predicaments. However, in the first two cases, the people didn't write off Hashem. But in the third, at Maso Meriva, they did. For we can withstand any challenge that comes our way when we know that we have Hashem on our side and inside, and we remain strong to that basic principle. But once we start questioning in our head and normalizing that doubt of having Hashem in our lives, and making that question acceptable to us, whether in our cynical questioning or our cast-off actions towards Torah and mitzvos, we run the risk of a blind spot attack from Amalek. Indeed, the Torah itself identifies why it is that in the future, Bnei Yisrael would face tough times. The Torah tells us in Parshas Vayelech that the Jewish people will declare, V'amar bayomahu, they will say on that day, Halo al kiein Elokai b'kirbi, mitzauni haraos ha'leila. It's because Hashem is not inside of me. That's why all sorts of bad has befallen me. In other words, when we are handling any challenge, physical, medical, international, economic, political, militaristic, you name it, being acutely aware that Hashem is on our side, facing the threat, and that it's a good idea to seek what He wants from us and from the outcome instead of questioning it cynically and working to achieve those expectations, that anchors us and it brings out the best course of action. And how are we to do that? So the famous author, the Mabit, notes that we need to declare it and prepare it constantly. When Chazal told us that the Shechita never left the Kosel HaMa'aravi, the Mabit asked, what difference does it make if the Shechina is in Shamayim or the Shechina is at the Kotel? And he answered, while it makes no difference from Hashem's perspective, it makes a big difference to us. Because when we feel close to Hashem, we receive that reassuring comfort we so desirously seek. If He's far away, then it becomes harder for us to connect. Mabit adds that this is why Hashem kept the Shekhinah at the Kosel, so that we would know that there is a place on earth where we can connect to Him and feel the closeness of our bond. And maybe that was the role of the tree in Marah. When we're bitter, we can't grow. However, when we place the tree, the Eitz Chaim into the water, when the symbolic of putting our precious Torah in the center of whatever is troubling us, we can actually grow and conquer our challenges and overcome our bitterness. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz adds that this bond takes preparation. He notes that one who doesn't contemplate his trip to the Kotel, or any holy site for that matter, preparing to receive the Shekhinah, will not get what the trip is supposed to be all about. It's like taking teens on a tour of Israel and watching them being focused on the selfies. It dampens the experience if it's left unchecked. More can be achieved when we prepare to remind ourselves that what we're doing, with whom we're doing it, and what the purpose of what we're doing is all about. And the same needs to be said not only about our trips, but also about our mitzvah experiences, our tefillah experiences, and our Torah experiences. If we were to immerse ourselves and our families into Hashem-centered Shabbos, the Hashem-centered mitzvah, or the Hashem-centered tefillah experience, even simply with just a simple reminder of what I'm doing is speaking or acting in the way that you, Hashem, wanted me to, it would go quite far to countering that criticism and culture of cynicism about Hashem in our world. And more importantly, on a personal level, it'll bring meaning, purpose, and direction in our lives, which would help us deal with the uncertainty in life, which is the greatest weapon of Amalek. Laughter and humor are great tools that can be utilized in the service of Hashem. But when we use it in the service of Hashem, and not in the cynicism that keeps us away from properly experiencing Hashem, that's when it's useful. Bringing Hashem closer, especially in the tough times, which will help us get closer to the day when we ultimately hope for. Az yamale schok pinu ulshonenu rina, az yomru vagoyim higdiya laHashem lasos emele. At that point in time, our mouths will be filled with joy, and our tongues will be filled with rejoicing. Even the nations of the world will see that Hashem wanted us, and oh, how long we long to laugh at together when we will achieve that opportunity. Shabbat Shalom to all.